Hello everybody, welcome to the module on the concept of sustainability. My name is Dr. Lavanya. I am an assistant professor at BITS Pilani, Hyderabad campus. My research interests are in political ecology and decentralization. In today's lecture, we will be trying to understand the concept of sustainability. How did this concept become so integral to public policy making both at the international as well as the local level? In order to understand this, we are going to depend on two sources. One, a paper by Lilly titled Sustainable Development, a Critical Review, which was published in one of the most reputed journals, which is World Development, and another equally seminal paper by Kids titled The Evolution of Sustainability, published in the Journal of Agriculture and Environmental Ethics. In order to understand this particular concept, we are going to divide this module into three parts. The first part, we will look at the roots of the concept of sustainability. In the second part, we will look at how sustainability relates to development. And in the third, we will look at both the strength and the weaknesses of this particular concept. By the end of this module, you should be able to understand, where does this concept come from? Does it really change the very idea of development? Has it led to a paradigm shift? Now, let's go to the first topic that we will be discussing, the roots of the concept of sustainability. Now, you should understand that there's no one definition of the idea of sustainability. Many people define it differently, and the reason for it is because this concept has many roots. Now, what do we mean by roots? Imagine a tree. It has many roots, and those roots make up the tree. So this tree is the concept of sustainability, and it draws from various other concepts, which is why there are so many different ways in which sustainability can be understood, because different people draw from different roots of this particular concept. Nevertheless, all of these different ideas that were developed over a century make up what we understand as sustainability today. In this particular part, I am going to focus on Kids' paper. Now, he talks of 6 roots. Now, there are many others, but these are the most important. So, let us go through each of these roots of sustainability, understand the concepts that made up this broader idea of sustainability. Now, the first root that we're going to go and look at, or the first concept, is the ecological carrying capacity root. Now, why do we call it ecological carrying capacity? It's because it comes from the ecologists. The concept is carrying capacity. Now, what do I mean by carrying capacity? Carrying capacity has been defined by ecologists as that which a given ecosystem can provide sustenance for a maximum number of given species, and that exceeding that maximum will set in motion a chain of events cutting the population back to or below the maximum is the heart of carrying capacity. Now, that sounds complex. Let's break it down. Let's use an example. Now, this is an actual example that happened. There is an island called as St. Matthew's Island. This island had a lot of grassland. Now, the government at that time decided to introduce reindeer. Now, there were no reindeer in this particular island ever before, and there were no natural predators of the reindeer on this island. They introduced about 60 reindeers. What do you think would happen? Now, as you could imagine, the population of this reindeer started to explode. They are grazing animals, so they used to graze on the pastures. The population went from 60 to almost 1,600 in a matter of a decade. Could this particular trajectory of growth continue? Obviously not. What happened is that the reindeers reached what we call the concept of carrying capacity. They reached a limit of food supply. The minute the number of reindeer went over and above the amount of grass that was available to feed the reindeer, there was a precipitous decline in the number of reindeer, and in fact, in 3 decades, not even one reindeer was left on that particular island. So, they went beyond the carrying capacity of that particular ecosystem, and they went to what we call as the point of crisis. And beyond the point of crisis, either according to the concept, we go back to the original number of reindeer that was there, or we go below it. And in this case, in St. Matthew's Island, they actually went below it. And in the end, there were no reindeer left. I hope you now understand what we mean by carrying capacity. This idea comes from ecologists. So what are they concerned about? They're concerned about the availability of resources, land availability, population levels, growth rates, environmental degradation. These are the concerns of this particular concept. It is not till the last 10 to 20 years that the idea of carrying capacity also started to bring in ideas of resource distribution, of equity. Now let's go to the next concept. The next root of sustainability comes from a concept called as resource environment. So it's called the resource environment root. Now this is driven by a theory called limits to growth. Now the limits to growth theory has two assumptions. The first assumption is that the levels of human living are constantly rising with mounting use of physical resources. What does that mean? We as human beings, the way we live, the amount of pressure and demand for resources that is there in terms of our lifestyle is ever increasing. That's the first assumption. What's the second assumption? The second assumption is, despite technological progress, we are spending each year more resource capital than is created. So, to the first assumption, people would say we can create better technology. Therefore, even though we're using more resources, our technology would help us use it more efficiently or differently. However, this theory assumes that the rate of technological development does not actually keep up with the amount of use or the amount of pressure we put on the resource. So what would be inevitable? According to the limits of growth theory, if this cycle continues long enough, basic resources will come into such short supply that rising costs will make their use in additional production unprofitable. Industrial expansion will cease and we shall have reached the limit of growth. So this is the second concept, the resource environment. There are resources that we take from our environment, and our pace of living, the amount of demands we have, the amount we consume, is putting this under great stress. The second root to the concept of sustainability. The third root is the biosphere root. Now this is a very interesting root. Let's take the Amazon rainforest at present. As you know, in 2019, there are great fires burning in the Amazon. Now the Amazon is basically, the main part this is happening is in the country of Brazil. So you would think that this is a problem for Brazil. However, the entire world is in panic. The French president comes up and says, our house is burning, not Brazil's house, not for Brazil, but our house is burning. Why? Because when the Amazon burns, it's going to affect the entire world. It's going to affect the amount of oxygen we have. It's going to affect the climate all over the world. It's going to affect our ecosystem in different ways, and that's the biosphere root. The biosphere root basically means, and I'm quoting Marsh here, the scale of change initiated by man is no longer local but global. The climate and hydrological effects of deforestation provide an example. You would think that this quote comes from this century, but believe it or not, Marsh said this in 1864. So this is one of the core roots of the concept of sustainability. There's one more idea within this biosphere root, and that is a concept we today call as intergenerational equity, meaning what we do today is going to affect our future generations. Now in 1905, a particular professor of Harvard, Schaller, basically said, we may be sure that those who look back upon us and our deeds from the centuries to come will remark upon the manner in which we use our heritage and theirs, as we are now doing, in the spendthrift way, with no care of those to come. Hence, as you can see, the biosphere root provides a very, very important basis for the concept of sustainability. The next root is called as the critique of technology root. Now, what does this mean? Now, if you take it very literally, you would mean that technology is critiqued? Not at all. What this particular concept is saying is that when we adopt a particular technology, it has to be based on the circumstances, the ecological, the economic, the social, and the cultural circumstances in which you are taking in that particular technology. So basically what it means is appropriate technology. Now, this was very well captured in a book by E. Schumacher. It was titled Small is Beautiful, Economics as if People Mattered. This was a book published in 1973. Now, what did this book do? This book basically said that it is very important for us to look at appropriate technology movement, and this foreshadowed the concept of sustainability. Let me give you an example. This was an article that was done on Orissa. All right. In the 1970s, the government of India decides to bring in Jersey cows to real backward areas of Orissa. They provide them with Jersey cows in terms of the semen, impregnated local cows. They removed the bull, the traditional Kari bull that was there in these backward regions, and they provided each farmer an acre of land wherein which they could grow fodder for these cows so that they would be able to increase the amount of milk that they get from each cow. It is a very good scheme. You could probably see nothing going wrong with this particular scheme. However, Sainath did a study about this particular scheme in 1991, and he found that this particular region in Orissa was in distress. There was huge outmigration because the livelihood of the people who were dependent on these milch animals in terms of dairy products that they provided was in distress. All the cows had died out because they did not have. Sainath did a study of this particular program in 1991. What he found was that there was great distress in this particular region. There was huge outmigration because the livelihood of these people, which was dependent on these milch animals and the dairy products, had completely been decimated. Why is it so? The traditional bull no longer existed. The Jersey cow that was introduced could not actually survive in the Orissa climate conditions. Why? Because this particular region has cyclical droughts and floods. The Jersey cow required a high level of water in order to survive. This cow was not bred in Orissa, therefore was not able to bear the cyclical droughts that Orissa had. The fodder that was required for the Jersey cow also required a great amount of water. Now, there was no water for the cows and there was no water for the fodder, and hence you can imagine what happened. And this is the idea of appropriate technology. When you introduce a particular incentive or a particular technology, it has to take into consideration the local circumstances, whether they be ecological, whether they be economic or social and cultural. And this is another root of the concept of sustainability. Thinkers have also stressed that when we're talking about technology, we should also give way or give space for what we call as a radical or alternative technology, meaning just because it comes from the West, for example, the Jersey cow, the semen was provided by America. Just because it comes from the West doesn't mean it's always better. The idea of the alternative is to look beyond what is valued by the market as the best technology. The next route of sustainability is quite radical. It is called as the no growth or the slow growth route. Now, it is unimaginable for you and I to think of no growth, but that is basically what this particular concept was providing. This idea, or the philosophers of this particular idea, were thinking of what is the type of society we live in. If we live in a society that only talks of accumulation, consumption and wealth, does that give any space for social values? Does that give any space for the idea of justice? Now we go back to the theory of limits to growth. Now there's a very interesting book which was critiqued later on by many people by an author called Meadows. He publishes this book in 1972, and the message of limits to growth was that the world is headed for collapse within a few decades through population growth, depletion of resources, pollution, degradation of the environment, or a combination of all of these. We are reaching a point of disaster. Now he used data, he uses models in order to show us that. what was he saying? Now, his model was not right. We did not, he predicted that by 1991 we would run out of oil. We have not run out of oil. But what it did do was make people think about what is the limit to this growth that we have. If we see ourselves progressing only through GDP in terms of producing more goods, more services, how much more is possible? We assume it's unlimited, but is it so? This particular conceptual theory therefore follows two assumptions. First is that growth must stop at some point of time. That is, continuing growth for an indefinite future is physically impossible. The second assumption is that a no growth economy can actually promote ethical values, meaning that our values should not just be in terms of consumption or how much we produce, but social values. Let me give you an example here. We had 9/11 and George Bush was the president of America. Now, after 9/11, to make the people feel better, George Bush could have said anything. He could have said pray. He could have said come together as a community. He could have said talk. But do you know what he said? He said shop. Now, why would the President of America say post 9/11 shop? Because that's how we see ourselves doing better. That's our therapy. And that's basically what is critiqued by this particular theory. It says, should consumption and growth as we see it in terms of goods and produces and services be the only way we understand development and growth, right? So that's the no growth and slow growth theory, and very radical in terms of what it's proposing. The final route, the sixth route, is the eco-development route. Now, this particular idea was provided by Professor Sachs. We'll come back to this concept of eco-development further in the next part of this particular module and in a further module that deals with sustainable development. But what does eco-development mean? Let me quote from him. Eco-development is an approach to development aimed at harmonizing social and economic objectives with ecologically sound management in the spirit of solidarity with future generations. Look at what it's saying. It's saying economic, social, ecological, not just for us, but also for future generations. And this he termed as eco-development. You must be thinking, hey, this is sustainability. But this was not, or he did not use the word sustainability, but it's definitely one of the main roots of the concept of sustainability. This particular paper that he wrote, he advocated a set of actions. Now, the actions were to establish an ideological commitment to doing better, to more ecologically sustainable ways of life, sharpening political and administrative integrity, looking at international parity, dealing with poverty and hunger, talking of disease mitigation, reducing arms, moving closer to self-sustainability, cleaning up urban squalors, balance human numbers with resource, conserve resources, and finally, he says, protect the environment. It shows you how wide his idea was. The idea was to bring in the value systems, the ideas of tackling hunger, poverty, within the entire concept or the discussion of ecological management. So as you can see, the concept of sustainability has very diverse and interesting roots. All of the concepts that I've spoken to you about have developed over 100 years. So when I say sustainability today in 2019, it has a long history behind it. Let me recap. The word sustainability conceptually is driven through 6 ideas. The first, the idea of carrying capacity. There's a limit to what an ecosystem can bear. Second, it is the idea of the resource environment, that the way we live produces a particular impact on the resource, and if our consumption moves on at a rate that is unsustainable, we're not really going to be able to sustain the resource itself. The biosphere route. Local is not what we need to be concerned about, but the idea that what we do at a local level, what's happening in Brazil will affect the world at large. And the biosphere route also has the idea of intergenerational equity, which means not just for us, but for future generations as well. The fourth route is critique of technology, meaning appropriate technology. We have to look at the circumstances in terms of the ecological, the economic, the social, and the cultural when we adopt a particular technology. No growth or slow growth route, which basically means that can we grow? Can we continue to grow? Can it be business as usual forever? Not really. There is a point where our growth has to stop. And finally, the eco-development route, which brings in values, the idea of social and cultural values into the concept of management of a particular resource. So from all of this, from these various routes, we understand what makes up this broad concept of sustainability. In the next part of this particular lecture, we will talk of one of the most important concepts that's always attached to the idea of sustainability, whether it was in these roots or whether it is in the way we understand sustainability today, and that is the concept of development. Thank you.